I learned years ago, and this is really part of my entrepreneurial journey, is that people follow people with big ideas. If you think small, you're going to attract people who like people who think small. If you think big, you'll attract people who like people who think big. And I think the reality is that your vision has to be big enough to include other people. And so I always have to think about it from the perspective of not am I thinking big enough for me, it's am I thinking big enough for the people who want to join me on the journey?
Welcome to Corporate Competitor, presented by Forbes Books, the podcast where executives share how the lessons they learned playing sports shaped their leadership. With me for today's episode is Glenn Sanford, founder, CEO, and visionary behind eXp Realty, one of the fastest growing real estate brokerages in the world. Under Glenn's leadership, eXp has expanded to more than 85,000 agents, gone public, driven 84% revenue growth in 2 years, and built a culture recognized by Glassdoor as one of the best places to work. Glenn's story is a true testament to grit, adaptability, and a relentless belief in what's possible. Qualities shaped by his years of running track and wrestling in high school and now competing in jiu-jitsu. Glenn, thanks for joining us.
Hey Don, thanks for having me here. This is a lot of fun to spend some time on your podcast.
Well, I appreciate it. And as I've studied you and prepared for today, there's so many facets of your journey that I want to learn about. Your unbelievable growth at eXp Realty, the fact that you rescued one of my favorite magazines, Success, by buying it and breathing life into it a few years back, just to name two of the very fantastic ventures that we're going to talk about. But I want to start with, I know you were named a Glassdoor top CEO with a 97% approval rating. An honor that clearly speaks volumes about how the people that you work with see you. And I'd love to ask, as you reflect on that recognition, what is it that you attribute that to?
Well, definitely it's a relentless focus on what I'll refer to as org design or basically an obsession with culture. And what does that mean? And how do you continue to be startup oriented and then enlist people into that frame of operating? So I think that's runs counter to a lot of people's thinking because they think about the idea that physical offices is where you actually connect and build relationships. And in the modern economy, in my mind, that actually reduces connection and relationships because of just the tooling of things that we now have available to us.
Tell me how if you're trying to coach me, how do I become more startup-y? I love that. I mean, I don't know that that's a word, but I don't want to play Scrabble with you. I think you'd make good words up. How do you become more startup-y?
So one of the things that we've done over the since August last year is we've started to build what we refer to as digital twins of different personas in the organization. So you can now have a conversation, a long form conversation with my digital twin, which will help you understand what it means to be cross-functionally aware, how to empower people at the edges to make decisions, what are the guardrails for decision making. And once people understand the rules, then it's much easier to operate, at full with their full abilities.
So how do I know I'm not interviewing the digital twin, Glenn Sanford?
Well, partially because I don't think the video portion is that good yet. But give me
Yeah,
2 years.
give me 2 years, and then I'll do this podcast again with somebody that, with you, and you'll still be wearing the same shirt. That's the crazy part.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so as you know, but I want to go back real quick because another piece of that question that we were asking earlier was about this Glassdoor recognition. And the listeners of this podcast are largely leaders and aspiring leaders. They're people who are moving into that space. It's the space you speak to at Success Magazine and that you talk to every day at EXP. But when you're thinking about values, decisions that you've made, and the way you've kind of relayed that culture within your organization, are there elements of that then and the way that you've taught it that have earned you the kind of trust and loyalty that would get you a 97% number?
I think so. One thing that I learned years ago, and this is really part of my entrepreneurial journey, is that people follow people with big ideas. So if you think small, you're going to attract people who like people who think small. If you think big, you'll attract people who like people who think big.
Man,
And I think the reality is that your vision has to be big enough to include other people. And so I always have to think about it from the perspective of not am I thinking big enough for me, it's am I thinking big enough for the people who want to join me on the journey? And what you want is you want more people, wanting to join your team than you have capacity to have them on your team. So you want to have a vision that where you get to choose who's actually there as opposed to the job wanted ad, or you're trying to hire somebody and you're just trying to get somebody who can fog a mirror.
I love it. You're obviously a competitive soul. And I know running still fuels your competitive spirit. How do you, but entrepreneurship, business has to do it as well. How do you feed that competitive fire?
It was probably, I would say grade school, in my, it was definitely elementary, but I remember waking up one morning, actually going to sleep one night and just like determined that when we did the laps around the field, that I
Yeah.
was going to win. And it was interesting because it was the first time and that I realized that first the first part of winning is winning in your mind.
Boy, that is so
And
true.
and I did. I out sprinted everybody. I don't with people though. I compete with me with using people as sort of the benchmark. So because I'm trying to get better for me, I'm really trying to get better to beat other people. I have to sort of measure myself against something, and so the people are is the benchmark. But I'm not really trying to beat them. I'm trying to see how I'm doing relative to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. But I want to go back to that line you had that it was the first time you realized that winning starts in your mind, right? How do you keep that alive today for you? What are the ways that are there mental exercises that you present to yourself that allow you to kind of do you wake up with a certain frame of reference? I'm just looking for something that makes Glenn Sanford who he is even today.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time over the years developing the I'd say the habits of success, and so much so that I would say they're generally on autopilot,
Yeah.
meaning that I wake up somewhat obsessed with my next project, whatever that next project is, and so um, uh, my projects over the last 10 months have been how AI impacts things. So every day I'm waking up and, 4 in the morning and I'm working on something because I'm like, oh, that's going to work. That's potentially going to work. And so uh, the one thing I think about is this idea that I want to be in the future before anybody else gets there. And so
Mhm.
mentally, I'm always thinking about what is the future is going to happen regardless of what we want to happen. but we do have a vision of what the future might look like. And if we can arrive there first, then we can sort of take advantage of that in a positive way to lead the next group of people into the future. So for me, I'm always future pacing myself and always thinking about what's the next thing around the corner.
That concept, Glenn, of future pacing yourself. I love that phrase, future pacing yourself. How do you, is there something I can do to help begin that process for myself? If I'm trying to learn how to think like that, to future pace myself, are there maybe a couple of tips you would give me?
I think everybody kind of knows what's going to happen in the future. Like they have a vision of things that are obviously going to happen eventually.
Right.
But instead of waiting for them to show up, pick, one or two of those things to learn it before it becomes mainstream. Based on your interests. Like, something I did this last week, just to give you an
Yeah.
example. I follow on my news stream anything artificial intelligence. So I'm always reading all the headlines on Google News and my Apple News feed. So I go there at least once a day and just read all the headlines. And because that's where the future stuff is being sort of displayed. And so I read the headlines, and then if there's something that captures my interest, then I go to that website, I go into ChatGPT or Claude or some AI and ask it a few questions about it. I might search it in Google and to figure out what's already there. And then if I find a tool, I'll jump in and try it out. So this last week, I think it was on Thursday, Google is talking about a new music model that for musicians to basically be able to make music. And so I went to the website, and it's wait list only. So I added my name and said, "Are you an artist?" And I'm like, "I'm not," but it's like, but I filled it out anyway, because I'm like, going, this sounds like a pretty cool tool. Then I went and did a search, and I found another tool, and that just got released like a week and a half ago. And then I went into it, and I started I went and said, "Build me a song to do this." And I was like, man, I was blown away at how good it was. And then on the weekend, I'm like, I wonder what it would take to actually publish music. And so over about 7 hours, I went and built 7 different songs. I've just released my 8th today. And then I actually now on Spotify, iTunes,
I could go
Amazon
listen to
Music.
I could go listen to Glenn Sanford and the who's your backup band?
Well, it's all AI. Like
Glenn,
it's an
Glenn
entire,
Sanford and the AIETs.
yeah. It's called Lose. So I ended up going to ChatGPT and just said, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking about." And it said, based on your interests, I think a good name for your production company would be Lucid Resonance. So, and so if you do a search on Spotify or Google Music, you'll or whatever platform, and you look for Lucid Resonance as the artist, you'll find a bunch of music there, and it's actually good. Like, I shared it with a bunch of people. Like, I have people saying, "Hey, I just listened to it with my kids. They love it. We're creating a playlist with it." I'm like going, like I'm like blown away, because my future pacing self recognizes that the playlist of the future is not made up of music created by other people. It's music created by you in conjunction with an AI, and it will match exactly the interest you have in real time versus somebody else's created music. So that's kind of this sort of future pacing kind of thing. It's like, are you playing with the tools? And so I went from Thursday finding a tool to now being a published artist on iTunes.
Now we'll get back to the conversation in a moment, but first, do you know how to turn a moment into lasting momentum? That question has been front and center for me over the last 8 years, and In that time, I've interviewed leaders in sports, business, military, and politics to create a model so that you know how to harness momentum to make it your strategic advantage. Now, it's all available. The model and all that, all those interviews are available in my latest book, The New Science of Momentum. Now, if you're serious about sustained success, this book is for you. There's a link in the description to order, and it is available everywhere quality books are sold. That is so awesome. Well, we're going to help you. We're going to put in our show notes a link to Lucid Resonance, and we're going to we'll the first time you play a major venue, well, maybe you'll never play a major venue because you don't have to. But we'll do our best. We'll fill the stadium for you.
There you go.
So back to track, right? You know, the funny line, you run to enjoy beating people, but I love the way you've relayed that forward, that now you realize people are just kind of the other markers. The truth is you're running against yourself. Is there a story from the track that you still think about today? A story from those races, those days that you that still in some ways is a memorable moment for you?
Yeah. So so when I grew up, initially grew up in British Columbia, Canada.
Right.
I grew up running track and running cross country and playing soccer. Those were my three sports. And then my parents moved us to Oklahoma, and I went from being in a small school to a larger school the first year down there, and ran track. I was on the junior varsity team, and then we moved again. Yeah, so the whole school was around 40
Wow.
kids, well, my graduating class was about
Wow.
40 kids. So
Big
it was a
difference.
very small, and it was kindergarten all the way to grade 12 on one
Dang.
campus. So they didn't really have much of a sports program. There was no track team, there was no cross country team, there's no soccer. So my three favorite sports weren't exposed there.
I could bet soccer in Oklahoma probably wasn't thought of. They weren't thinking about soccer back then. That's not the football they wanted to play.
Well, and ironically, the school was so small, it didn't even have a football team.
Oh,
So, I
wow.
mean, in Oklahoma, not having a football team, I mean, that's almost sacrilege. But but I was still into my running, and so I'd run road races every weekend, and I literally built the track team. So, and I basically cobbled together kids from wrestling, from basketball, from baseball, and anybody who wanted to run. And we would go, and we went up to the local university, and we'd run around their track and do the stuff. But I was both the coach, I was a player coach, like, and we
In
didn't
high
really
school.
in high school. And for me, it's like I definitely get the runner's high. So,
Mm.
which is real. If you run enough, you get addicted to it at some level. And so for me, it was like, this is what I enjoy doing. I'm pretty good at it. I ran a 4:25 mile time was my high school, mile time.
Yeah.
And trying to do the best I could in coaching them to be the best they could be. And some of them would gas out running the 800 meter, and some of them actually got reasonably good. But I was the sort of the star of the track team, and I would say the one thing I took away years later. Was the phrase that and this really plays into a different sport that I'm still involved in, which is judo. But what the difference between a white belt and a black belt in judo is a black belt shows up to every practice,
Mm.
um, and whether they like it or not. In fact, I think that's probably one of the things that I recognize from sports more than anything is that sports is more about showing up every day, whether you want to or not. That was the same thing back in high school. Like I would get my runs in, whether I wanted to run or not. There was lots of days I didn't want to run, but I still got my run in.
So how does that idea of showing up every day, how does that play into the way you're building EXP, for example, which is so fascinating? I mean, I love the growth. There was obviously a hole in the universe you saw yourself filling, just as you did by creating a track team. How does this idea of I'm going to show up every day, whether I want to or not, how does that take hold as you begin thinking about a company like EXP?
I've had a degree of success throughout my real estate career specifically. That's been pretty solid, throughout my career. I was, rookie of the year in my first year in real estate. I was the top buyer's agent my first full year. I was in the top 50 nationally with Keller Williams, my fourth full year in the business. So the two things that I recognized was one, you can't rest on your laurels, and the organization can only move as fast as the leader is willing to invest in the organization
Amen.
and moving it forward. And the second one was, if there's the second one is that, like, not being fully engaged and being part of something, for me, is not very satisfying. Like, I've tried sort of the retirement piece a couple times, and quite frankly, I don't see any fundamental reason ever to retire, because at some level, my personal value, even to myself, is the impact I'm making in other people's lives. So I just to feed my own soul, I need to be helping some group of people move things forward.
I love that. And it's funny. That is kind of almost a consistent theme of many of our guests is that the one thing they failed at is retirement. Right? They don't seem to be able, if you've got it in you to help to take an idea and actually and bring others along with you, right? That willingness to do that is something that you just your mind doesn't stop because you choose to maybe have your body do a little less, and it drives you crazy if you get all these great ideas up there that no one that you're not executing on.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm a little bit, I've got so many business plans, ideas, thoughts, things to execute against. Like, like my GoDaddy domain name list is like long, with all the business ideas that I think are worth doing at some point that I'll never get to because I'm so busy working on this other stuff.
Back to your athletics in high school. I know one of the guys I read about was your high school wrestling coach, Gary Cartwright. Is there something you learned from him about coaching? Because that's what you do today. You're essentially you're the head coach of 83,000 people, right? Is there a coaching lesson you can maybe reflect on that you might have learned while grappling?
To some extent, you have to switch on a gene, which I hate turning on. Now it comes naturally without it being turned on in this way, but you actually have to dislike the person you're going
Mm.
against. Um, and so that was like, I had to actually, to some extent, dislike my competitor
Or
so
your
much
opponent?
so
Yeah.
that I wanted to actually sort of, totally beat them into the mat. And and that was sort of that trigger, that tool that I used to go to another level, back then. And I don't really want to admit that was my tool, but that was my tool. Now, as soon as I was done, then I would like no longer hate my competitor.
Yeah. And but I love that because the truth is, I mean, what a great lesson though that most of us think we're maxed out if we've hit a certain level. But the truth is, and as your coach taught you, as Coach Cartwright taught you, there's there's a hidden level within all of us. Most of us don't ever tap it, and sometimes there are unique ways you have to get there. Moving forward to EXP, I just again, I've studied it, have had a chance to talk to a number of your folks. Sean Kokoska, good mutual friend of ours, introduced us. But how did your leadership style evolve as it grew from that little startup to a global company? And is there anything you had to unlearn in that process?
A lot of times we bring people in because we believe that they have expertise that we lack.
Hmm.
And often we um, sacrifice the vision of the company that we're trying to build in order to keep these experts happy. And what I realized is that, and again, I think there's a particular segment of entrepreneurs that this related to. I don't think it's a universal truth, but at least for the type of entrepreneur like I am, which is I think deeply, I spend an inordinate amount of time obsessed over the business that we're trying to go after. That at some level it's harder to get to the point where you're in what you're trying to do is not the smartest because your vision is so singular. EXPT started in 2009. We basically believed that the future real estate brokerage would be 100% online and you would never need to go to a physical office. And you think about all the people that are in organized real estate in 2009, and I was probably one of the few people that actually believed that.
We made reference earlier. You made a decision several years ago to step in and really kind of breathe new life into one of my favorite magazines, Success. I know, like you, or like me, you're a big fan of Jim Rohn, whose content, the legendary leader who was really the root of Success magazine. And I'm just wondering, tell me about the decision to step in. I mean, again, in a world in which you're saying, "Hey, the future is," one of the things that a lot of people say the future is not are magazines, right? But yet you so understand it's not just the magazine, it's the community that comes with it. Tell me about your decision to step in with Success.
A phrase that stuck with me um, from years before, which was opportunities are never missed; they're just given to somebody else. So when he mentioned it, it's like, first I recognized it as an opportunity, and I recognized that if I was going to jump on it, I needed to jump on it quickly. And so that was the initial part of it. And then of course we did roll it in eventually into to EXP World Holdings as a company. But the real idea was it's really it's one of the last magazines that's truly about personal development. You've got a lot of other magazines that are out there on entrepreneurial success or business philosophy, or whether it be Harvard Business Review or Entrepreneur or Fortune, but there's no real magazine that's sort of focused on mindset.
Hmm.
Even though mindset's certainly a part of all of the other stuff, but for me, mindset's actually a first principle. If you've got your mindset right, then the entrepreneur stuff is easier and all the other stuff's easier. But if you don't have your mindset right, none of that stuff will matter.
Boy, that is so powerful. And yes, I mean it's what attracted me for many years as a reader of Success, and then I went to work for it as a writer for a bit, as a contributing editor, and loved the opportunity to have developed a lot of content for them. Hugely grateful as a fan of the magazine that you stepped in because I don't know where it would be, if anywhere, without you today. So breathing new life into it, really valuable and grateful.
Well, thank you. No, it's a bit of a labor of love. I mean, I still get a little bit of pushback from the board going, why do we own this? Because it isn't, but it's not fundamentally a cash flow generation machine. It's more like a money pit. But it's important in the overall ecosystem to have a tool that's focused on mindset.
Yeah, no, and you're right. I mean, if you don't get that right, everything, your best plans, everything else might not matter if you don't have the mindset right. So, the ability to develop that internally, super valuable. One question: many leaders today are facing real challenges with turnover, and I know, in some of your space, obviously, turnover is generated by the economy, by what's happening in the housing market. People, though, today seem to be switching jobs more freely than ever. We've seen it. What have you found to be most effective as a leader in keeping your team engaged and reducing that churn? What are some ways that you, as a leader, um, uh, that you're able to intentionally do to build that culture?
Um, well, one, make the company about something other than money.
Mm,
The reality is if you think about it, if you were to ask most business people, what's the purpose of a business? I think most business people would say the purpose of business is to make money.
right,
Uh, and the problem is that literally nobody is attracted to a company to work for a company to make money for somebody else. Like
right,
there's like virtually no interest. Now they're
mm,
interested about making money for themselves,
right.
and putting food on the table and a roof over their head, but they're really attracted to a mission. So if you can turn your company into a mission-driven company, then the money becomes the natural byproduct of the mission. So our primary mission is to be the most agent-centric real estate brokerage on the planet.
Agent centric. And what does that mean?
It means that every decision of the company needs to enhance agents' lives in some capacity. So
Mm,
the way that I think about it is that real estate sales is, it's a tough business. It's it can be a great paying business, but it's not an easy business. And so you've got a lot of individuals out there that are out there in their communities listing and selling homes, and they're living commission check to commission check. And
mhm.
it's a pretty challenging way to live, having to rely on the next sale and the next sale and the next sale.
Right.
So for us, the one thing I learned years ago was, recognizing where there's a hidden need in the marketplace. And
Mm,
and I use this phrase, which is I refer to myself as a focus group of one, meaning that if I can't solve a challenge, looking at the tools that are available out there, available to me at the moment, then then there's probably a bunch of me that have that same challenge. And if I can solve that, which in this particular case was, how do I how do I fundamentally build a real business in the business of real estate? And I play with this idea a lot, which is, most real estate agents are sold the idea that they own a business.
mhm.
Um, when in reality, the business owns them, because if they're not out there listing and selling real estate, then they're out of business.
Right.
And so if you recognize the real truth of it, which is that they have a business that owns them and there's no way off of the hamster wheel, then could you build something that actually solves that piece? So that's what we fundamentally went to solve, and recognizing that one solve unlocks a whole bunch of things for a real estate professional. But what tools do we provide them? What training do we provide them? How do we make sure that they're getting paid quickly? And so this becomes the mission, is anything to do with improving their day to day while providing them a path to actual real retirement, should they choose to retire.
So, question on focus group of one. I love that. I love that phrase, by the way.
Mhm.
But that's where the focus group, though, what you're referring to there is the establishment of the problem. the solution you would go out and actually populate, I assume, right? You're not trying to solve the problem by yourself, but you're establishing the problem very well by yourself.
Basically, I think that's what an entrepreneur really does, is they recognize a problem, and then they go and they cobble together some way to solve the problem. And then they deploy that into the marketplace.
So I'll tell you, Glenn, I feel like I could learn from you all day, but I get the chance through your magazine to learn lots from you already. But I want to tell you, thank you today for being a focus group of two with me as we've dug into these issues. I am so grateful for the time you've given today to help us as we've studied these lessons, and that you're a great corporate competitor. We appreciate you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Don, and I can't wait to hear this podcast myself. See
Awesome.
it all pieced together.
I need to thank all of you for listening through some of the Wi-Fi challenges, which made some of the transitions a little difficult. But the content was so rich that we wanted to roll with the punches and put it together the best we could. Now, before I get into my favorite takeaways, I want to give you a quick update on our publishing schedule. Starting this week, we'll be sharing new episodes every other week because, exciting news, our podcast producer, Savannah, is expecting a baby and will be on maternity leave this fall. Now, we've done this before and we know how to turn these into really great experiences, and I'm excited to be able to bring content continually to you. We're getting everything set up in advance, so you'll still get new episodes through the end of the year. And on the weeks without a new episode, we'll be posting YouTube shorts on our Corporate Competitor Podcast channel. So head over to YouTube for quick, valuable leadership insights between episodes. Now, I learned so much for Glenn today. I want to leave you with three great takeaways from this conversation, three things that will make me better. I loved his idea that even though his business grew and was growing rapidly and investors were all over the place, he realized that he needed to bring it back and make it more, I love his word, startup-y, right? He had to become more scrappy, and he needed to look at his business against the tools that were available today that weren't available when he first started. And so he used those tools, AI, digital twins, other things to help make his business better and help keep that culture alive. The second big takeaway for me came from his running career, right? I love that story about when he goes to that high school, so few athletes there, there wasn't a running team. So he created a team. He became both the coach and he was a runner, a player on the team. But I think that's actually a great metaphor for what he would do business wise, because he saw a hole in the universe and he went out to solve it. He became obsessed with the idea of figuring out how to make something come together that others didn't think were possible. He was future pacing himself. I love that idea, right? It wasn't that he was busy in the moment. He was thinking about the future and then pacing himself against that future. I love his line. I want to be in the future before anyone else gets there. Don't wait for things to show up. Get in the future. Great content there. And then I loved that conversation about him purchasing Success Magazine. The great line, opportunities are never missed. They're just given to someone else. He didn't want to miss the opportunity because he believed in the mission of the organization. He believed enough, even though some might say it's a legacy media, it's not a future led, but he knew the mission, and the people that loved that mission wanted to stay engaged and connected. And so gratefully, on behalf of all of us who enjoy that magazine, I'm honored that he did that and that we get to thank him for it today. And then he talked about the way to keep your employees engaged is to make your company about something more than money. And if you do that, money follows, but make your company about something more than money. And that even at EXP, his goal was to make it the most agent-centric real estate firm in the world. So doing those things allowed him to craft this amazing career of success, something filled with opportunities for us to model. I want to thank you for joining us today. If you would, please leave a comment on YouTube or a review on Apple or Spotify. I appreciate you.